Hi, you're listening to It Happened to Me, a rare disease and medical challenges podcast. The mission of our podcast is to support you, our listeners, and to create community as you confront the toughest challenges in life. All of us will experience health hardships. The real question is how we adapt. That's the focus of It Happened to Me, which wants to help you overcome limitations and live a full and satisfying life. Drawing on their own health challenges, co-hosts Cathy, Gildenhorn, and Beth Glassman interview guests who share stories and research to help you succeed in the face of difficult health obstacles. It happened to me. I'm not alone, and neither are you.
We are excited to introduce today's guest, as she is a seasoned journalist with 25 years of experience, Laura Bonnell. She founded the Bonnell Foundation in 2010 after her daughters Molly and Emily were born with cystic fibrosis, also known as CF. Driven by her personal experience and professional expertise, Laura uses her platform as a reporter to raise awareness. The foundation produces a podcast, so Laura is a fellow podcaster. The show is called Living with Cystic Fibrosis Podcast, and we put a link in the show notes, so please check it out.
Before establishing the Bonnell Foundation, she actively raised funds for the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, participating in the Great Strides Walk fundraisers and speaking at CFF events. Ms. Bonnell also organized events like the first celebrity softball game with Detroit Tigers wives and launching the Portraits of Cystic Fibrosis calendars in 2003, both of which are integral to the Bonnell Foundation's fundraising efforts today. Through her foundation, Laura continues to advocate tirelessly for those affected by CF, leveraging her journalistic skills to amplify the cause and support the CF community.
Hi, Laura, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi,
Thank
thanks
you
for having
being
me.
here.
Thank you.
It's wonderful to have you as a guest. So let's start at the beginning. Can you explain to us what is cystic fibrosis and how does it affect those who have it?
Cystic fibrosis is a genetic disease that you're born with, and it causes chronic and fatal lung infections, and it interferes with digestion in really every organ. You can get diabetes related to cystic fibrosis. It impacts everything. There are 40,000 people in the United States that have cystic fibrosis and 70,000 in the world, but there are probably more because people of color are underdiagnosed.
So, Laura, were your girls diagnosed prenatally or was this an afterbirth screening?
There was no screening for cystic fibrosis when my daughters were born. So they're 27 and 29.
Wow.
And the screening didn't happen for cystic fibrosis until 2007. We can talk about this later, but even now people get missed because not every mutation is represented in newborn screening. So when Molly was born, as you said, I was working full time as a reporter. I said to the pediatrician, first of all, my husband and I were talking, Molly, when we kiss her, she's salty. The dog is constantly licking her foot because goodness, salty, and changing her diapers. Like, it was the first time I changed diapers as a parent, but it was very greasy poops. Now, these are all red flags of cystic fibrosis, which we didn't know at the time.
Sure. It's your firstborn. How would you know?
And we didn't know it was in our family. And my husband has 7 siblings and I had 2, but no one had ever been diagnosed. So we were thinking about a public service announcement and we realized it was cystic fibrosis. And then I started researching and I was like, distended stomach Molly had because she was so full of gas because she could not digest food that she was starving. So she wasn't getting any protein. She was just constantly shaking and hungry. And at first, I remember we thought it was funny because kid's always hungry. Wow, she's got an appetite. And then realized, oh my gosh, she won't meet any of her growth requirements if she's not getting
digesting.
Right.
Yeah. And I was certain she had CF, and I called the pediatrician, and she's like, "You're a first-time mom, go back to work. You're crazy." And so I did. And then I just kept reading more, and I said, no, we have to test her like this week. And so I was actually on my way to a breaking news story, which I have no memory. After the doctor called, I have no memory of what story I was on my way to that day.
Sure.
But the doctor called, and I was like, I know she has CF, just tell me. She's like, pull over. I'm like, I know what you're going to tell me. And then she said, your daughter has CF. And so I'm still friends with that pediatrician. She felt so bad, and she was so guilt-ridden. And we just had lunch. It's been 29 years since she diagnosed with our assistance, but I still see that pediatrician. So,
Laura, isn't this really so familiar? Parents know best, and really don't ever be deterred. Doctor, I'm sure well-meaning, but your child, and never be put off by a doctor. You are your child's best advocate. And we've discussed this over and over, and kudos to you. You knew what your daughter needed, and you made sure she got that help.
And it's the same thing for our listeners. You know your own body, and question your doctor if you're not getting the diagnosis or the attention you need, whether it's your child or your body. It's the same thing.
Same thing. You're right, Cathy.
I agree.
Well, how did you and your family process the initial CF diagnosis? And what were some of the immediate challenges you faced?
Well, the first thing we thought of was we really wanted 6 kids. And then we thought, okay, well, maybe we'll have 4. And then we thought, okay, what are we going to do here? I mean, that was the initial. And of course, you wanted information. But initially, we were just thinking, we just can't have an only child. And that may seem silly to say, but that was our first thought. And on that day, I was like, we have to take a lot of pictures of her. And we decided we were having a second child no matter what. And, how could this happen twice? We were naive, whatever. So those were our first thoughts. And then it was, by the end of the day, we looked at each other because we were sitting on the porch drinking a beer, crying. And then we said, well, she's going to have the best life. Like, this is going to be a great life. We're going to do and learn whatever we need to learn and move forward. Like, what are we going to do? Just be sad forever? So yeah, it was a lot of emotions that day, but we just decided we need a lot of information so we know what to do to give her the best care and life possible. And that's how we started.
Wow.
You brought tears to me. I just got choked up listening to this, how brave you both were and how determined, and how lucky Molly is to have you as parents.
Positively. And Laura, can you also share some of the daily medical routines and treatments that are necessary for managing cystic fibrosis?
Yeah, and like any disease, it's different for everyone. So what I'm saying is definitely, to both my girls, because we did have a second daughter, Emily. There's a 1 in 4 chance with each pregnancy that you can have another child with CF. And we, like I said, naively thought, how could it happen twice? It's a very long story on how we got to this decision, but we had Emily. The girls know the story, no regrets. And we have 2 beautiful girls. We had nebulizers and vest machines, and it was about 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours at night to do treatments. Inhaled albuterol and pulmozyme and hypertonic saline solution and all the other drugs that came as they got older and things got better. The nebulizers, the cups had to be cleaned. Anybody whose child has asthma or other diseases, when you have tubing and all that stuff. It has to be clean because it's critical. So there was a lot of worry about, is it clean enough? In the beginning, we we were told not to put them in the dishwasher. So after every treatment, we had to boil
Sterilize everything.
sterilize
Yes.
everything. It was
Uh-huh.
just so much work every morning, every night. And then we would cup our hands before we got the vest machines and do physical therapy on their lungs, on the side of their chest, and the front of their chest, the side, and then on their back. And, you had to do it a couple different ways. So, it's a lot of work.
It's a lot.
Looking back, it was great family time. It really was. But, when they get older and then it's like, you got to get to soccer practice, but you have to do your treatment first, or you have to do it later, or you always had to fit it in.
You have such a beautiful attitude with
Yes,
this,
you do.
and approaching it so that I'm sure it's healthfully rubbed off on your kids. And I would imagine they approach it very positively.
Yeah, and I would
forward.
have to say, I don't know how I would have survived any other way. I know initially when we started, there were parents, when we started going to a support group, there were parents that were so negative and everything was so sad and woe is me. And we lasted one time in a support group in the beginning because afterward, I said to my husband, Joe, I said, do you want to kill yourself? Because I'm ready. I can't go back to that. That's not
right.
I'm going to move forward because I want to jump off a cliff now. So we never went back to a support group. I'm not saying people shouldn't. I'm just saying find your right group.
Right.
That wasn't how I wanted to proceed in life. I wanted joy. I wanted to raise happy children.
Beautiful.
Well, I think that maybe you should have been leading the support group and they would have responded to your enthusiasm. That's what I think it sounds like. Maybe they didn't have a good leader because you radiate joy and optimism here. I have to remember, must have been 25 years ago, I got pneumonia. All I can say is I remember how difficult it was to breathe. So I have so much, my heart goes out to your girls and people that have cystic fibrosis. The idea of having trouble with the mucus in your lungs, having trouble breathing, it was very real to me. And I think that maybe our listeners, if you had COVID and couldn't breathe or had pneumonia like me, that we can certainly empathize with what your girls live with and how necessary these treatments were. I wonder if you could talk about the change of treatments. Certainly now your girls are getting older, what its treatments are like today, or do you know what the change has been?
So the nebulizers were slower. And then once, fast forward now from when my girls started 29 and 27 years ago, now the nebulizers work a lot quicker. Instead of something taking 40 minutes, it may take a lot less. And some medicines that needed to be nebulized now are in something called like a Toby podhaler, which is nothing like vaping because vaping isn't good. But this Toby podhaler is like this powder form that the girls can inhale in 1 second.
Wow.
And it's just, they put it in their mouth after they put the dose in and breathe it in, and that's it. And it's that quick. So things have really improved. And prior to my girls even being born, enzymes, you would have to like mix them with things. They weren't encapsulated in the like coated plasticky kind of, something that would, just dissolve in their mouth. And now the enzymes are. So it's much easier to take enzymes to digest food. And the CF modulator drugs are now, we're on the 4th one, which is doing really well. Not for the entire cystic fibrosis population. There's about 10% of the cystic fibrosis population that can't take these new CF modulators, and the current drug is called Trikafta.
I'm so happy you brought that up because I did some research on CF, and Trifecta, it seems to be a wonder drug. And I was hoping that your girls were able to use it. and that it's been helpful. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
I can. You are not alone in calling it trifecta, because a lot of people
It's not
do.
trifecta, it's
It's
tricapta.
tricapta, but it's
Capta, and I
okay because
apologize,
no, it's
tricapta.
okay because it is made up of 3 different, ivacaftor and all of these caftors.
Yes.
So it's made up of 3 things. And in England, it's called Kaftrio. So it it's the exact same drug, does a couple different things, but it corrects the underlying condition of cystic fibrosis. It's not a cure. People are still getting sick with cystic fibrosis and while they're on Trikafta, but it is incredible. When my girls started it, every day you saw something new. The first day, their sinuses started to clear. It corrected the cell. It just went from being like maybe in the form of a fist, and then it just opened it up. That's what the drug did. You had what the scientists were explaining it to lay people was you have a window and a door that are closed, and this drug opened them up. So it was beautiful every day to notice something different. And the biggest things were that their sinuses cleared. One of my daughters said, I didn't realize I couldn't really smell until I went on Trikafta and realized now I can smell better, because when you have CF, you get polyps in your nose and things happen. And then my other daughter, who used to cough for an hour in the morning every day and at night and have coughing fits, on day 4, I didn't hear her coughing anymore.
My goodness.
I was journaling everything, but I wasn't saying anything to her because she needed to experience it and write it and notice it herself. And she's like, Mom, do you notice that I'm not coughing anymore? And yes. And I would just cry by myself with joy, being so happy. And I absolutely thought, well, now I can breathe. Now they're going to live and I can breathe. And this is a weight off.
Yes.
Because I felt like now I feel like they have a chance to have a normal life expectancy. When my girls were born, it was 19 years old. And thank God they've passed that life expectancy. Yeah, it was huge for all of us.
But this drug is not without its issue. It's a bit controversial. Do you want to talk about that?
I wouldn't say, I mean, some people have had side effects, and my daughter did have side effects.
She did.
Emily had to go off the drug on day 9.
I see.
Because she had a rash from her neck to her feet, like welts.
Oh my goodness.
Just like really red and was scary. And we went into the emergency room and they like ripped her clothes off, did the epinephrine, and she didn't go back on it for a year because it was very traumatic and she was worried.
She was afraid.
And I know, then maybe this is what you're talking about, that some people were experiencing what they thought were mental health issues related to the drug, but we were also, Trikafta came out October of 2019, and then we went into a pandemic. I don't know.
Hard to know what was causing.
And they're still doing research. And then a new pill is coming out made by the same pharmaceutical company, made by Vertex, is coming out in January, which it won't be called Trikafta. It will be called something else, but Trikafta has 3 pills, and this one coming out in January will only be 1 pill. So, and they're going on, a lot of people got rashes and things like that. And then there was some concern over the mental health. So it keeps getting better and better, which is a beautiful thing. And people should know, when you kind of fail on a drug, it's not the end of it. Emily found an allergist who desensitized her to the drug. Made it liquid form. I know. Who knew? Great. Scientists are amazing. They made it a liquid form, and they baby birded it on her tongue for 6 weeks, and then started her on the pill form, and
now she can tolerate it. That's extraordinary. So there's also an issue about pricing with this drug.
Not like you mean for the insurance companies?
Yes, that some of the states have tried to regulate the price of the drug. Have you read about that?
I am so in the middle of all of this.
Yes,
And
in Maryland, actually, that's one of the places. There are a few states that are trying to regulate the price.
right. It's a very huge issue. So
Yes,
there are prescription drug affordability boards called
yes,
PDABs, is the acronym.
yeah,
They're trying to get it in Michigan. They have it in Colorado. It was the first state. I testified there constantly about why it's not a good idea. I think anybody with a rare disease who's
yes,
in a rare group would say, I don't care if it costs $1 million, I'd
right.
find a way to get it for my child.
Absolutely.
And that's how I
You
feel.
know, this is sort of an interesting, so just for our listeners, what we're talking about is it's an interesting flip because the states were trying to control the price. The people that need to use the drug are saying, please don't interfere. We don't want the drug companies to stop making this drug because you're not going to allow them to make profit. Am I summarizing this correctly, Laura?
Yeah, I think
It's
you
sort of
are.
an interesting change where the states think they're doing the right thing and those afflicted are saying, but out. We
Yeah.
need this drug.
And I would have to say that it's so complicated, and to
Yes.
narrow it down so much is sometimes challenging. But yes, you are right. And I think what happens is this prescription drug affordability board may be made up of people that aren't familiar with all the diseases and the drugs that they're just making decisions on. And then you
Yes.
bring in all these other things, which are quality adjusted life years, which is when they decide if your life is worthy or not enough to be on a certain drug. And then, yes, then you kind of discourage research and development.
Yeah.
And then it's just this whole snowball thing. And I think the answer is kind of the Rare Disease Advisory Council, which we're trying to implement in Michigan and is in 29 other states, is these councils are made up of experts, of parents, of doctors, of insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, nonprofits, patients. And then you would say to this prescription drug affordability board, here's why we don't think you should look at this drug.
Right.
And I also think that it's the whole health system, right? It isn't just pharma or insurance. Insurance has a problem with the pharmacy benefit managers. They're making enormous amounts of money making decisions about drugs. So there's a lot to fix. And yes, Trikafta for each of my kids is $330,000. But in Michigan, it's covered by our insurance. And then when my kids lived in Michigan, which they don't now, it was covered for them by a secondary insurance. So every state is different. Not every state has that kind of secondary insurance, and it's not Medicaid. It's a different program called, in Michigan, it's called Children's Special Health Care. So yeah, it's interesting.
But at the end of the day, so we hear a price tag and enormous amounts of money, but the people who need the medication will find a way to get it paid, that there is some way to get it paid. And the important thing is to keep this medication in circulation because it's such a great product.
Yeah, and I'm so glad, Beth, that you brought it up because it's really important for everyone to know, because this doesn't just impact cystic fibrosis. This impacts every rare disease and every chronic illness. And regardless of what you have, you need to know your rights. You need to know how to say, oh, well, the insurance company said they're not going to pay for it. But that isn't your last line of defense.
Right.
You can appeal that. You can get it on a formulary. You can talk to your doctor, code it differently. There are so many different ways. And it's terrible we have to do it. Like, who can have a full-time job, take care of their kids, advocate for themselves, or have the disease themselves, and then have to take a day off work so they can
to do this?
Yep. It's just, there's so much.
But yet the miracle of the drug being there. I mean, that's the flip side, that it's there and your girls are benefiting. And I'm so happy to hear that. I'm so happy.
I will tell you this, Emily said, so Molly's the healthier of the two girls. They have the same two cystic fibrosis mutations, but it just, as we know, it affects people different. Every disease does. So Molly's healthier than Emily, and Emily has been the sicker of the two girls. Emily said, I could barely run a quarter mile. Then she went on Trikafta, and she said, before I knew it, I ran 5 miles.
Wow.
I know. And she called her boyfriend and she said, your lungs are fine. How come you're not running every day?
I love that.
Just, the running, the boyfriend, the story, all of that. It's just wonderful.
It's wonderful.
Positive news. Normalcy.
Absolutely.
That's normal. It's
Right.
great. That's great.
Yeah. This is so great. But I wanna ask you, what are some of the long-term implications of CF?
I would say mental health is the biggest one, and thankfully everybody's talking about it so much more now. And for the caregiver, I think we often forget about the caregivers. I think it's a lot for my girls. They think about their death all the time. When's the disease going to get to me? Or my daughter right now, the one who's living in London, she, just told me she had a cold 2 days ago. I worry about a cold. She worries about a cold. This is going to turn into pneumonia. It happens all the time. So,
I see.
They usually wait 2 days after they get a cold. Is it getting better, or do I need to call the doctor and get on antibiotics right away? So everything is an issue. But when you have a disease, you're very on top of it. You're always thinking about taking care of yourself and washing your hands, and if you're going to mask, when to mask, and all of those kinds of things. But it's constantly like, it's not just a cold that's going to go away. So that I think is a burden. And for myself, it's always been, in the beginning, it was always they go every 3 months to their cystic fibrosis specialist. And every 3 months when they were little, I would say, how long are they going to live? And I cried at every appointment. Like, the stress of, well, how long are my girls going to live? If they didn't have a disease, I wouldn't be thinking about their life expectancy every day. But since I knew that there was a timeline, you think about it all the time. So I was thinking about it all the time. And when you have cystic fibrosis, you're on a high fat diet because you can only get half the calories, even with enzymes, because you have a hard time digesting. So that's why they take enzymes, because they're only getting half the calories anyway with the enzymes. So usually people with CF have a hard time gaining weight. So that's why they're like, put butter in everything, high fat, high fat. Since then, we've learned just eat healthy. I think it's changed a little, but in the beginning, I was eating high fat with them.
Of course.
Yeah. And it was a way of medicating yourself, right? It wasn't alcohol for me. It wasn't narcotics. It was food. So I gained 120 pounds, I think.
Wow.
And I kept saying to my mom, everything is fine. Everything's fine. Fat people can be happy. Come on. Like, everything's fine. And I just was like, you just keep going, like Finding Nemo. Just keep moving, just keep going. And now, since the pandemic, I've lost all that weight, and I'm still trying to lose 10 more pounds, but it's because I had time. Because all those years I was like, fighting with an insurance company, or cleaning the meds, or making sure everything was fine at college, constantly, and it's usually the mom that does it. I mean, my husband, if he was here, he would say she did it all, because that's just what moms seem to do. Dads are very important in this process, but I'm just saying, for us, it was mostly me. So I tell new moms now, make sure you're being honest with yourself and you're talking to a friend. I just felt like I just had to survive. I had to, and then life is just so busy. But now I feel like, back to myself again. And that's wonderful.
It is wonderful.
That is.
And
Well-
everybody is dealing with something, right? And everybody's
Yes.
dealing with it in a different way. Like I said,
Yes.
if it wasn't food, it would have been alcohol, or it would have been
Mhm.
something.
And it's good. It seems as if you've confronted it and you're able to work with what you needed to do to solve your crutch that you had developed in dealing with the issues you had to, there was a lot you were managing.
Yeah. And I think I think it's an addiction. And I think we all have some addiction, whether because now I feel like it's working out is my addiction. Like, I don't think that anything, it's just, and then of course, seeing a counselor. I saw a therapist on and off all the time, and my girls are still seeing a therapist. So I think it's really important to, see somebody and talk to somebody. And also it was okay to know, okay, I've gained weight, can't deal with that now, got to deal with everything else.
Right.
Then, because we can't possibly deal with everything all at once. It's impossible.
Boy, you are so articulate, insightful. You have this positive energy. And I'm sure it serves you well in your journalism career. And I'm wondering if those journalistic skills have really helped you in hosting your podcast, Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast.
Yeah, I think it has. I think journalism helped with, you have really, journalism was power. When I was news reporting, because I stopped in 2019, just before the pandemic, to do my foundation full time, but I could get the governor anytime. Like, you could get anybody. If you had to ask them a question or you wanted a response, so you have that kind of power to get people. And so I felt like when we were talking before we started this podcast, you can get anybody. You can talk to Dr. Francis Collins. You can, because you've got a mission. You're going to share it with everybody. So the podcast, yes, I thought the whole CF community needs to know and hear from Dr. Francis Collins, or they need to hear from somebody with CF, or they need to hear about what's going on in Egypt with the people there that are underdiagnosed. Most of the people, the things that I share about CF families globally, weren't aware that people in other countries don't have access to basic things like enzymes or vitamins. And so sharing that through the podcast, and it's really storytelling, right? So doing that, I felt like that's how I get to raise awareness. And I have so much fun. Like I said, you got two or the three of you are like my new best friends. Like, we met, we connected. You're easy to talk to. It's an adventure. It's a new, you're impacting my life, and we have things in common. And it's just so important to talk to other people and hear everybody's stories. So yes, that's what it's done for me.
So, Laura, can you tell us, how did you transition from being a fundraiser to establishing a foundation? I mean, that's a big deal.
It is. And I think that I didn't really think about it when we were raising money for like the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation and doing the walks. I didn't really even think about that as fundraising, even though clearly it was, and people were giving money and we were giving money. I always thought of it more as raising awareness. So when I started my foundation, I hate fundraising. I just have to say it. Not fun. It's not fundraising.
I agree. I agree.
I don't know. It's hard. I don't like asking people for money.
No,
but it's crucial, because without it, we couldn't do our financial assistance for anybody in the country that has CF. But I really had to learn a lot about different ways to fundraise, to make it fun. and to keep it going and keep people interested and excited and wanting to come to events. And things like our celebrity baseball game, those were fun things. You got to see the Detroit Tiger Wives when we first started, and then we switched it to like celebrities. It was the police or the FBI or the government officials against the media. So it was fun, and people saw people that they knew, and you really had to figure out a way to make it interesting. And then our Portraits of Cystic Fibrosis calendars, it was about storytelling. It was about the people who had CF and how they could inspire you with everything they were dealing with. So that is how I made the transition. I just thought, we have to be teaching somebody something. It can't be about the money. The money comes because we're doing something wonderful. But that's how I made the switch.
That's great.
That's great. Well, can you tell us more about all the events that you have put together, and the Portrait of Cystic Fibrosis calendar, and all of those initiatives that the Bonnell Foundation is using to really help make a name for itself? Is it helping to raise money for the community?
It is. So this year, what we're doing, I've changed the Portraits of Cystic Fibrosis calendars a little bit because I always featured people who had CF, which is really important.
Yes.
But then through my journey of getting back to myself, I never lost myself, I wouldn't say, but it was getting back to who I was. I felt like it's about the parents. This is our journey too.
Yeah.
So I'm featuring all these parents that I've interviewed and talked to from around the US, and the parents I've talked to, like I talked to Khaled, who's from Jordan, and he lost 2 of his 3 children to CF.
Oh, no.
They just deal with CF there. They weren't diagnosing kids there. They didn't even know their kids had CF, and then they were dead, So
oh my goodness.
And how he goes on, and now he's the mayor of a city in Jordan, and he's like, I'm not going to be depressed. I'm got to move forward and help other families. And his oldest is now 18, and she wants to be an attorney, and they don't have access to every med that we have here, but he's like, I'm not stopping. I just want to help. And I think that brings up a point, which I might be getting off topic a little, but that is our therapy. My foundation is my therapy. Khaled's mentoring is his therapy. And I think it's so important when you feel that you're able to help someone else. I just was referred a mother. We have a mentoring program, and a mom was referred to me, found out in vitro that her child has cystic fibrosis. And she found out when she was 5 months pregnant. And I said, do me a favor, enjoy your pregnancy. Everything's going to be fine. And let's give you information slowly. You don't want to be overwhelmed and think this is going to be horrible, have a miserable rest of your pregnancy. And then, and then I got a call from a wife of somebody who was just diagnosed at 40 years old. They were trying to have a baby, but the vas deferens doesn't connect in men with CF, so you have to do in vitro to have a baby. Usually there are cases where you don't, and I said to her, you're 40 years old, but think of yourselves as newborns, because you're just learning, you're just diagnosed. Right. So I've had 29 years in this field of CF. I know so much, but again, you don't want to be overwhelmed by it, because you would jump off a cliff. That's the whole thing of not, of just taking information slowly, processing it, and then moving forward.
That's so true, because community support seems so important for helping families and patients deal with CF. And what advice would you give to those dealing with CF who just feel incredibly isolated or overwhelmed? With many, CF or any rare disease or medical challenge tend to feel that isolation and overwhelmed feelings. And what do you advise?
I mean, I think it's definitely different for everyone. It's kind of what you feel. I know in the beginning, I thought, well, nobody wants to hear how it really is. Nobody has time. And that's kind of when I got on that road of, if somebody asked me how things were, I'd always say, oh, it's fine. Everything's fine. And it wouldn't be fine. I could have one kid in the hospital traveling to an event for another one, but never tell anyone. So they would never know I was traveling an hour and a half to get to the hospital, check on that child, go to the other one's event, leave, go back to the hospital. It was just, I didn't want anyone, I don't know if it was pity or I felt like I was burdening them with my stuff. It would be a burden
Meanwhile,
to
you're being
them.
superwoman. I mean, this is
Mhm.
incredible.
Well, I'm not saying it was a good thing to do. But I had my support group, my family, so supportive. Sister-in-laws, brother-in-laws, my mom, everybody, there's so much support. But what I tell the new moms in answer to your question is find your people early and know who you can confide in so that you can say to someone, I am so overwhelmed. Can you please pick up the other kid? Or, my husband and I, or my wife and I, whomever, we need to go out. We need to go have dinner. I don't want to worry about whether they're doing their treatments. The treatments are set up. Can you do it with them? There was a lot of that too, feeling so responsible, make sure they did the treatments correctly.
Sure.
I can't trust anyone else, so we have to do it all. So
Can therapy help with this too? I mean, definitely need the support from those you trust, but what about your therapist that you mentioned was so important with your daughters and with you in processing all of this?
Yeah, I think therapy does help, but I would say, and I'm glad that you're bringing me back around because I feel like I got a little off track, but which brings me to a brilliant point, thank you, is that your CF community, all the other CF moms who know exactly what you're going through, that's who I ended up, you could just call and they knew, they knew what to say, they knew what not to say. If we were in the hospital, then I started reaching out, hey, are you in the hospital? Is anyone else in the hospital? And they would say yes, and we'd go sit in the garden in the hospital, cry. That
that's
was
wonderful.
the most helpful because they understood. You knew everything, and nobody was saying to you, I knew somebody with CF and they died. That's just, I get it. People are trying to relate, but that's hard after you've heard that 100 times, so.
I think talking about all these different factors that have helped you is something that we're keenly interested here at our podcast. And you talked about family support, community support, therapy, and advocacy. All of these things were helpful to you. I wonder, you typically hear also about exercise. Did you find that was at all helpful, or meditation, mindfulness? That also is something that people talk about, Laura.
I think exercise is the best thing for me, but I also know that I didn't have time. I would think about it a lot when the kids were little, but we're doing treatments 2 hours before school, or we'd have to do it when they would fall asleep or when they were still asleep in the morning because you could hold the nebulizers, they were breathing it in. So when am I going to go work out? So that was an issue. It's it's about time. And then if I'm working full time, and then in radio and TV, you're working usually 4 a.m. to 1 in the afternoon, or you're working late nights. That kind of job wasn't conducive to working out. And then, but I think, yes, if you can make time, or if you don't have time, I mean, reading books is a good way to escape, right?
Yes.
You have to find something, or just walking with your friends.
Yes.
When your girls are at volleyball,
Right.
Yes, it's really important.
And faith, was that also a factor?
Yes, faith was definitely a factor. I was in a Bible study group the entire, until recently, and have the same friends from when my girls were in kindergarten and even before then. But as far as school goes, I think faith is important and different for everyone. My husband's Irish Catholic, I'm Ashkenazi Jewish, and I was in a Catholic Bible study for 29 years. And I loved it. And spirituality. My mother is spiritual, not religious. So yeah, all of it. I've always told my girls to manifest their future, what they wanted to see. And yeah, we're always trying to think of different positive ways. I write down every good little quote my kids say or that I think of.
I love that.
Because I always said to them, this is what I've always said to them is everyone has something, we have CF.
That's exactly right.
It's just like, don't woe is me yourself. Someone's got it worse. I promise you.
Yes.
So.
Yes. What does the future look like for CF?
I mean, I think it's very promising. I'm very hopeful. I'm also realistic. And I know that mentally, this is kind of where myself and my girls are. We're not planning on a cure in my lifetime or their lifetime. If it happens, that's a bonus. But just hopefully that there continue to be better drugs. Kind of relying or hoping for a cure is depressing to me. If it comes, great. But to just keep, is it this year? Is it going to be this year? I feel like that was me way back when saying to the doctors, are they going to live 10 more years? Tell me, how late? Are they going to live till they're 60? And nobody knows that, right? So it's just better to live your life.
But now this seems to be a chronic disease instead of a death sentence.
Exactly.
And so that's a big change.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's absolutely beautiful. Well, you have just been remarkable. And where can our listeners find more information about the Bonnell Foundation and about your Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast?
It's on our website, and you can click on podcasts to find our podcast or anywhere you listen to your podcast.
Any platform.
Yep,
but we'll put it then in our show notes, both the links for your podcast and the link for your website and the links for the podcast.
Thank you.
Which will be great. But thank you so much, Laura, for taking the time to come on It Happened to Me today and share your family's experience with cystic fibrosis. And listeners, be sure to check out Laura's podcast, Living with Cystic Fibrosis. Thank you so much and be well and good health.
Thank you. You're both a joy and delightful, and I really appreciate you having me on. It's been an honor. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of It Happened to Me. We encourage you to learn more at ithappenedtomepod.com. Please use the contact form on our website to submit your guest suggestions, comments, questions, ideas, and feedback for the show. You can also email us directly at ithappenedtomepod@gmail.com. We would really appreciate it if you can leave us a 5-star rating and review on your podcast app like Apple or Spotify. This helps others in the rare disease and medical challenge community find us. It Happened to Me is created and hosted by Cathy Gildenhorn and Beth Glassman. I'm Keir Deneen from DNA Today, and I serve as our executive producer and marketing lead. Amanda Andrioli is our associate producer. Ashlyn Anokian is our graphic designer. And remember, it happened to me. I'm not alone, and neither are you.